I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the strange purple flowers sprouting along my fence line, but I never imagined my HOA president would have deliberately planted them to destroy my property. My name is Lucas Garrison, and I had been living peacefully in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Raleigh, North Carolina for 3 years before everything went sideways. The neighborhood was typical suburban America, rows of cookie-cutter homes with manicured lawns, sidewalks perfect for evening walks, and an HOA that started out reasonable but had recently taken a turn for the absurd. The trouble began in early March when Karren Whitmore took over as HOA president. She was the stereotypical middle-aged busybody with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that somehow screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," before she even opened her mouth. Within her first week, she sent violation notices to half the neighborhood for the most ridiculous infractions. My first notice was for having my trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours after collection day. I'd brought them in 10 hours after pickup, but apparently someone reported me, and Karren was more than happy to issue a $50 fine. I paid it, thinking it was a one-time annoyance. I was wrong. The second notice came 2 weeks later because my lawn was allegedly a quarter-inch too tall according to HOA standards. I measured it myself with a proper tool, and it was exactly within regulations, but Karren insisted her measurement was correct. Another $50 fine. I contested it this time, submitting photos with a ruler clearly showing the grass height, but the HOA board, which Karren had stacked with her friends, denied my appeal unanimously. My neighbor to the east was Dr. Henry Sullivan, a botanist who worked at North Carolina State University. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look exactly like what you would imagine a career academic to look like. We had chatted occasionally over the fence about gardening, and he had given me some excellent advice about growing tomatoes the previous summer. His yard was immaculate, filled with carefully labeled native plants and a small greenhouse where he cultivated rare species for his research. One Saturday morning in mid-April, I was drinking coffee on my back deck when I noticed the purple flowers. They had appeared seemingly overnight along the fence line between my property and the community common area behind my house. The blooms were striking, an almost neon purple that stood out against the green grass, but something about them looked aggressive. They were already thick, spreading in dense clusters, and I could see similar growth starting to creep into my yard. I walked over to examine them more closely. The stems were thick and woody, and when I tried to pull one up, it resisted stubbornly. The root system felt extensive. I grabbed my phone and took several photos, planning to identify them online later. That was when I heard Henry's voice from his side of the fence. "Those are kudzu variants," he said, his tone concerned, "or something very similar. Where did they come from?" I turned to see him standing in his yard, frowning at the purple flowers. "I have no idea," I replied. "They just appeared. I noticed them this morning." Henry walked closer, crouching down to examine the plants from his side. "This is bad, Lucas. These look like they might be hybrid invasive species. They will destroy everything if they are not contained immediately. They can grow up to a foot per day in the right conditions and will suffocate any native plants, damage structures, everything." "Are you serious?" I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "Completely serious. I need to get a closer look. Can I come over?" I led him through my side gate, and he spent the next 20 minutes examining the plants, taking samples with tools he retrieved from his greenhouse and photographing them from multiple angles. His expression grew darker with each passing minute. "This is worse than I thought," he finally said. "These are definitely invasive, and they have been recently planted. See how the soil is disturbed here? And these root balls are intact, which means someone transplanted mature plants. They did not spread here naturally." "Who would do that?" Henry looked at me seriously. "That is the question, but whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. These plants are illegal to cultivate or transport in North Carolina because of how destructive they are. This is not an accident." I felt anger rising in my chest. "I need to document everything. Can you help me with that?" "Absolutely. In fact, I insist on it. This is an environmental violation, and if these spread to the nature preserve behind the neighborhood, it could cause ecological damage costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to remediate." "Right, Yanar, we spent the next hour documenting everything. Henry took botanical samples with proper collection methods, photographed the plants with scale references, and even drew a detailed map of where each cluster was located. He explained that he would need to run tests in his lab to confirm the exact species, but he was confident they were prohibited invasive plants. That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA. It was from Karren Whitmore, and my blood pressure spiked as I read it. Dear Mr. Garrison, it has come to the attention of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board that you are cultivating prohibited invasive plant species on your property in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA Covenants. You are hereby ordered to remove all such plants within 72 hours and pay a fine of $500 for the violation. Failure to comply will result in additional fines of $100 per day and potential legal action. The HOA board has already contacted a remediation company, and if you do not remove the plants yourself, we will have them removed at your expense. Estimated cost, $3,500. Sincerely, Karren Whitmore, HOA President. I read the email 3 times, my hands shaking with rage. She was blaming me for plants that had appeared overnight on the property line. This made no sense unless she knew something about how they got there. I immediately called Henry, who came back over after reading the email I forwarded to him. This is very suspicious, he said. She is accusing you of planting these within hours of their appearance. How would she even know they are invasive unless she already knew what they were? You think she planted them? I think it is extremely coincidental that prohibited invasive plants appear on your property, and she immediately knows what they are and has already contacted a remediation company. Most people would not recognize these species. I am a professional botanist, and I needed to examine them closely to identify them. What should I do? Henry adjusted his glasses, his jaw set. You need a lawyer, and you need to document that you did not plant these. I can provide testimony and my lab analysis. This is not just an HOA violation, Lucas. If someone deliberately planted invasive species on your property, that is a crime under North Carolina environmental laws. I spent that evening researching lawyers and documenting everything. I took time-stamped videos of the plants, the disturbed soil, and the fact that they were clearly planted from outside my property line on the HOA common area side. I also filmed the email from Karren and created a timeline of events. The next morning, Sunday, I sent a response to Karren's email, copying the entire HOA board. Ms. Whitmore, I did not plant these species. They appeared overnight on the property line adjacent to HOA common area. I have documented evidence that they were planted from outside my property. I'm currently investigating the source and have consulted with a botanist who confirms these are illegal invasive species that were recently transplanted. I request that the HOA provide any information about work performed on the common area behind my property, including any landscaping or planting activities. I will be removing the plants from my property at my own expense, but will not be paying any fines as I did not plant them. The response came within an hour. Mr. Garrison, the HOA performed no planting activities in the common area. The plants are clearly established on your property, and you are responsible for them regardless of origin. The fine stands, and the 72-hour deadline remains in effect. Failure to comply will result in escalated action. I forwarded the exchange to the lawyer I had contacted, a property attorney named Mitchell Roberts, who came highly recommended. He agreed to meet with me Monday morning. That Sunday afternoon, I decided to knock on doors. If someone had planted these plants, maybe a neighbor had seen something. I started with the house directly behind mine on the other side of the common area, but nobody was home. The next house belonged to an elderly couple, the Johnsons, who I had met a few times at neighborhood events. Mrs. Johnson answered the door, and I explained what was happening. Her expression shifted from friendly to uncomfortable. "Oh, Lucas, I did see something strange," she said quietly, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. Friday evening, around dusk, I saw Karren and another woman working along the fence behind your house. They had a truck, and they were planting something. I thought it was odd because that is HOA common area, but I figured they were doing some kind of landscaping project. My heart raced. Would you be willing to write down what you saw and sign it? This is really important. She hesitated, wringing her hands. Karren has been very difficult lately. She fined us twice last month for things we did not even do. I do not want trouble. I understand, Mrs. Johnson, but what she is doing is illegal. She planted invasive species on purpose and is trying to fine me for it. If you saw her, your testimony could help stop this. She looked at her husband, who had appeared behind her. He nodded slowly. Write it down, Margaret. This has gone too far. Karren is out of control. Mrs. Johnson invited me in and wrote a detailed statement about what she saw, including the date, time, description of the truck, and that she clearly recognized Karren Whitmore. She signed and dated it, and her husband signed as a witness. I thanked them profusely and promised to keep them updated. Armed with this new information, I contacted Henry again. He had already begun his laboratory analysis and confirmed that the plants were a hybrid variety of kudzu crossed with another aggressive vine species. This is definitely prohibited under North Carolina law, he said, and the fact that they are hybrids suggests someone cultivated them intentionally. These do not occur naturally. Monday morning, I met with Mitchell Roberts at his office in downtown Raleigh. He was a no-nonsense attorney in his 40s with a reputation for winning HOA disputes. I laid out everything, the timeline, the photos, Henry's botanical analysis, Mrs. Johnson's eyewitness statement, and the email exchanges with Karren. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. This is one of the most blatant cases of HOA abuse I have seen, and I have seen quite a few. The problem is that Karren has made this much worse for herself by involving illegal invasive species. This is not just an HOA matter anymore. What do you mean? North Carolina General Statute 106, 202.19 makes it a misdemeanor to knowingly transport or plant certain invasive species. If we can prove Karren deliberately planted these, she has committed a crime. We need to involve the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, which oversees invasive species violations. Will that stop the HOA fines? More than that. If a criminal investigation opens, the HOA will back off immediately. No HOA board wants that kind of attention, but you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. Karren will not go down without a fight. Mitchell drafted a response to the HOA that afternoon, formally disputing the fine, outlining the evidence that Karren had planted the species, and notifying them that we were filing a complaint with the Department of Agriculture. He also demanded that the HOA preserve all records related to any activities in the common area and any communications Karren had about my property. The response was exactly what Mitchell predicted. Tuesday morning, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney threatening immediate legal action if I did not comply with the fine and remediation order. They claimed my accusations against Karren were defamatory and that I was in breach of my HOA covenants. Mitchell filed our complaint with the Department of Agriculture that same day, and they assigned an inspector to investigate. The inspector, a woman named Diana Chen, contacted me Wednesday morning and scheduled a visit for that afternoon. Diana Chen was thorough and professional. She examined the plants, took her own samples, reviewed all my documentation, and interviewed both Henry and Mrs. Johnson. Henry provided her with his lab analysis and explained in detail why these plants were prohibited and how they had been recently transplanted. This is a clear violation, Diana said as we stood in my backyard. I'm opening a formal investigation. These plants need to be removed immediately by a certified remediation company because they are hazardous. I will arrange for that, and the cost will be covered by the responsible party once we determine who that is. In the meantime, do not let anyone from the HOA onto your property without your attorney present. The remediation crew arrived Friday morning, dressed in protective equipment because the plants had already grown aggressively. In less than a week, they had spread across 15 feet of my yard, sending runners under the soil that popped up in multiple locations. The crew supervisor told me they would need to excavate 18 inches of soil along the entire fence line to ensure they got all the roots. These things are monsters, he said, shaking his head. Whoever planted these knew exactly what they were doing. This was intentional sabotage. The remediation took 2 full days and involved a small excavator, dozens of bags of contaminated soil that had to be disposed of specially, and careful treatment of the area with specific herbicides. The final bill was over $6,000. which Diana Chen assured me would be pursued against the responsible party. During this time, Karren sent me 3 more violation notices, each more aggressive than the last. One claimed my house needed repainting, which was absurd since it had been painted the previous year. Another said my mailbox was non-compliant, even though it was identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood. The third claimed I was running a business from my home, which was completely false. I worked as an accountant at a firm downtown and had never done any work from home that would constitute a business. Mitchell responded to each notice with detailed rebuttals and added them to our growing file of evidence that Karren was harassing me. "She is digging herself deeper," he said. "This is a clear pattern of targeted harassment. When this goes to court, and it will, this will not look good for her." The turning point came in late May when Diana Chen completed her investigation. She called me to her office for a meeting, and Mitchell accompanied me. Diana laid out a thick folder on the conference table. We have concluded our investigation," she said. "Based on the botanical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and records we subpoenaed from local nurseries, we have determined that Karren Whitmore purchased prohibited invasive plant species from an out-of-state supplier, transported them to North Carolina, and deliberately planted them on the property line of your home. We also found evidence that she planted similar species at 2 other properties in your neighborhood." I felt vindicated but also shocked. 2 other properties? Yes, we interviewed those homeowners, and they reported similar harassment from Ms. Whitmore. She appears to have targeted people she had conflicts with. We are filing criminal charges for multiple counts of violating North Carolina environmental laws. The penalties include fines up to $5,000 per violation and potential jail time. Mitchell leaned forward. "What about the civil side? Mr. Garrison has incurred significant costs because of this. That is between you and Ms. Whitmore, but our investigation report will be available for any civil proceedings. I should also mention that we have notified the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board about our findings, and they have called an emergency meeting." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. Mitchell advised me to attend, but to let him do all the talking. When we arrived, the parking lot was packed. Apparently, word had spread about what Karren had done, and nearly every homeowner in the neighborhood wanted to be there. Inside, the tension was palpable. Karren sat at the front table with the other board members, her face red and her jaw clenched. She avoided eye contact with everyone. The other board members looked uncomfortable and kept whispering to each other. The meeting was called to order by the vice president, a man named Tom Richardson, who clearly wished he was anywhere else. "We are here to address the recent allegations against our HOA president," he began nervously. "We have received the investigation report from the Department of Agriculture, and the board has reviewed it thoroughly. The findings are extremely serious." Karren suddenly stood up. "This is a witch hunt. Lucas Garrison has been violating HOA rules since day 1, and now he is making up lies to avoid accountability." "Sit down, Karren," Tom said firmly. "We have eyewitness testimony and scientific evidence. You deliberately planted illegal invasive species on multiple properties. The state is filing criminal charges." "I was trying to protect property values. Those homeowners were not maintaining their yards properly, and I was enforcing our covenants." A woman in the audience stood up. I recognized her as one of the other victims Diana had mentioned. "You planted those horrible plants on my property too. They destroyed my garden and cost me $4,000 to remove. How dare you claim you were protecting anything?" The room erupted in angry voices. Dozens of people started shouting questions and accusations at Karren. She tried to shout back, but her voice was drowned out. Tom banged a gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Finally, the room quieted enough for Tom to continue. "The board has voted to remove Karren Whitmore as HOA president, effective immediately. We are also removing her from the board entirely. Additionally, we are cooperating fully with law enforcement and the civil lawsuits that have been filed." "You cannot do this!" Karren screamed. "I will sue every single one of you." "Actually, we can," Tom replied, his voice steady now. "You violated your fiduciary duty to the HOA, you exposed us to massive legal liability, and you committed crimes while acting as our president. Security is here to escort you out." 2 security guards stepped forward, and Karren finally seemed to realize how serious this was. Her face crumpled and she grabbed her purse, rushing toward the exit while shouting obscenities. The room watched in stunned silence as she left. After she was gone, Tom addressed the crowd. "We owe everyone affected by this an apology. The board failed to oversee our president's actions, and we take responsibility for that. We will be reviewing all violation notices issued in the past 6 months and refunding any fines that were improperly assessed. We are also changing our policies to prevent this from ever happening again." Mitchell stood up. "My client, Lucas Garrison, incurred over $6,000 in remediation costs, not to mention legal fees and the stress of being falsely accused. How does the HOA plan to address that?" Tom nodded. "We are prepared to cover all reasonable costs for anyone affected by Ms. Whitmore's actions. Please submit invoices to our attorney and we will process them promptly." The meeting continued for another hour, with various homeowners sharing their experiences with Karren's harassment. It became clear that she had been out of control for months, issuing arbitrary fines, making up violations, and creating a hostile environment throughout the neighborhood. The new interim president, a calm woman named Patricia, who had served on the board before Karren took over, promised to restore sanity to the HOA. The criminal case moved forward through the summer. The district attorney's office charged Karren with 6 counts of violating environmental laws related to invasive species. Each count carried a maximum penalty of 12 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. Karren hired an expensive defense attorney who tried to argue that she had not known the plants were illegal, but the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution presented receipts showing she had ordered the plants from an out-of-state supplier that specifically noted they were prohibited in North Carolina, email exchanges where she discussed targeting specific homeowners, and testimony from a landscaper she had approached to plant the species who had refused because he knew they were illegal. Henry Sullivan was the star witness. He spent 2 hours on the stand, explaining in meticulous detail what the plants were, how they spread, the damage they caused, and why they were prohibited. He presented his laboratory analysis, showing that the samples from my property, the 2 other victims' properties, and Karren's supplier all matched perfectly. His testimony was so thorough and compelling that even Karren's attorney did not try to cross-examine him aggressively. Mrs. Johnson also testified, describing exactly what she had seen that Friday evening when Karren planted the species behind my house. Her testimony was calm and credible, and the jury clearly believed her. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 6 counts. Karren stood frozen as the verdicts were read, her face pale and her hands trembling. At sentencing, the judge was not sympathetic. "Ms. Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust in the most egregious way possible. You deliberately planted illegal invasive species that could have caused environmental damage far beyond the immediate properties. You harassed innocent homeowners and attempted to extort money from them through fraudulent fines. Your actions were calculated and malicious. I am sentencing you to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and fines totaling $30,000. You will also be required to pay restitution to all affected parties for their remediation costs and legal fees." Karren finally broke down, sobbing as the bailiff led her away. I felt no satisfaction in watching her cry, only relief that the nightmare was finally over. The civil lawsuit was settled out of court. Karren's homeowner's insurance initially tried to deny coverage, arguing that her actions were intentional and therefore not covered. However, Mitchell argued successfully that the HOA's insurance should cover the damages since she was acting in her capacity as HOA president, even if her actions were criminal. The insurance company settled rather than risk a trial, paying out over $70,000 to cover remediation costs, legal fees, and damages for all the affected homeowners. I received a check for $12,000, which covered my remediation costs, Mitchell's fees, and compensation for the stress and harassment I endured. The HOA underwent significant changes. Patricia, who became the permanent president, implemented new policies requiring board approval for any enforcement actions over $100, mandatory training for all board members on HOA law and proper procedures, and a transparent appeals process for any violation notices. She also organized a neighborhood meeting where she apologized personally to everyone Karren had targeted. "We are a community," Patricia said at that meeting. "We should be supporting each other, not tearing each other down. The HOA exists to maintain property values and provide common services, not to harass our neighbors. That changes today." The transformation was remarkable. Within months, Meadowbrook Estates became a genuinely pleasant place to live. The constant violation notices stopped, people started attending community events again, and neighbors who had been at each other's throats during Karren's reign began talking and even becoming friends. Henry Sullivan and I became close friends through the ordeal. We started having weekly cookouts where we would grill burgers and talk about gardening, his research, and life in general. He helped me redesign my yard, choosing native plants that would thrive in North Carolina's climate and require minimal maintenance. "You know," Henry said one evening as we sat on my deck watching the sunset, "this whole situation was terrible, but some good came from it. The Department of Agriculture has increased their enforcement efforts against invasive species throughout the state. Your case became an example in their training materials for investigators." "I am glad something positive came from it," I replied, "but I could have done without the stress." Henry laughed. "I am sure you could have, but you handled it perfectly. You documented everything, got professional help, and did not let Karren bully you into paying fines for something you did not do. A lot of people would have just paid and moved on." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but it was the principle of the thing. She was so obviously in the wrong, and I could not let her get away with it." The following spring, my yard was thriving. The area where the invasive plants had been removed was now filled with beautiful native wildflowers, butterfly bushes, and ornamental grasses that Henry had helped me select. The yard looked better than it ever had, and I received compliments from neighbors regularly. One Saturday morning, I was working in the garden when a moving truck pulled up to Karren's old house. She had been forced to sell after being released from jail because she could not afford the mortgage payments while paying restitution and fines. A young couple got out of a car behind the truck, looking excited and nervous in the way first-time homebuyers always do. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking hands with the husband. "I am Lucas. I live right next door." "Thanks," he said with a smile. "I am David, and this is my wife, Rachel. We are excited to be here. The neighborhood seems really nice." "It is now," I said, and I meant it. "Let me know if you need any help moving in or if you have questions about the area." Over the next few weeks, I got to know David and Rachel. They were engineers in their late 20s, relocating to Raleigh for work. I mentioned the HOA situation in general terms, not wanting to scare them, but feeling they should know the recent history. They appreciated the heads up and were relieved to hear that the HOA was now functioning properly. "We were worried about HOAs," Rachel admitted. "You hear horror stories online. But everyone we have met here has been friendly, and the neighborhood is well maintained without being oppressive." "That is Patricia's doing," I said. "She took over as president after the previous president was removed, and she has done an amazing job restoring sanity." Life continued peacefully through that year and into the next. I received a promotion at work. Henry published a major research paper that got significant attention in botanical circles, and the neighborhood continued to thrive under Patricia's leadership. The property values actually increased, proving that reasonable HOA management was far more effective than Karren's harassment tactics had ever been. I occasionally thought about Karren and wondered how she was doing. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to another state after completing her jail sentence, presumably to start over where nobody knew about her crimes. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I felt relieved that she was gone and could not hurt anyone else in our community. The most unexpected outcome happened almost 2 years after the trial. I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from Karren. It was brief and awkward, clearly written by someone who was not used to apologizing. "Mr. Garrison, I know this letter cannot undo what I did, but I wanted to apologize for the harm I caused you and your neighbors. I was wrong, and I let my need for control destroy the community I was supposed to serve. I've been in therapy and working on understanding why I acted the way I did. I hope you are doing well and that your neighborhood has recovered from my actions. I am truly sorry. Karren Whitmore. I read the letter several times, trying to decide how I felt about it. Eventually, I showed it to Henry, who gave it careful consideration. "Do you think it is genuine?" I asked. "Probably," he said. "People can change, especially after hitting rock bottom like she did. But that does not mean you owe her forgiveness or a response." "I think I will respond," I decided, not because I forgive her completely, but because acknowledging her apology might help her continue to grow. And it might give me some closure, too. I wrote a brief reply, acknowledging her apology and expressing hope that she had genuinely learned from her mistakes. I did not say I forgave her because I was not sure I did, but I tried to be kind while still being honest. I never received another letter, and I did not expect to. 3 years after the initial incident, Meadowbrook Estates had become the kind of neighborhood people moved to on purpose, rather than just because they found a house they liked. The HOA was functional without being oppressive, neighbors knew each other and looked out for one another, and the common areas were beautiful and well-maintained. Patricia eventually stepped down as president after serving 2 terms, and the neighborhood elected a retired teacher named Marcus to replace her. The transition was smooth, and Marcus continued the reasonable policies Patricia had established. I eventually started dating someone I met through a friend of Henry's, a woman named Jennifer, who worked as an environmental lawyer. We laughed about the irony of me dating someone whose job involved the same laws that had taken down Karren, and Jennifer found the whole story fascinating from a legal perspective. She had actually heard about the case through professional circles because it became a notable precedent for HOA liability when board members commit crimes. Henry and I continued our weekly cookouts, now often with our partners joining us. His wife, Margaret, was a retired librarian with a wicked sense of humor who loved to tell embarrassing stories about Henry from their 40 years of marriage. The 4 of us became close friends, taking trips together and celebrating holidays as an extended chosen family. Looking back, the entire ordeal with Karren and the invasive plants was one of the worst experiences of my life while it was happening, but it led to some of the best friendships and community connections I had ever had. It taught me the importance of standing up for yourself, documenting everything when someone is treating you unfairly, and not being afraid to get professional help when you need it. It also taught me about the darker side of HOAs and the importance of engaged homeowners keeping their boards accountable. During the investigation, we discovered that Karren had been getting away with increasingly aggressive behavior for months because most homeowners did not attend meetings and just paid whatever fines they received rather than fighting back. Her downfall only happened because I had evidence, witnesses, and professional expertise on my side. Many of her earlier victims had not been so fortunate. The neighborhood learned from that experience too. Meeting attendance increased dramatically, and homeowners started actually reading the HOA bylaws and understanding their rights. The board became more transparent, posting detailed minutes from every meeting online and sending regular newsletters about upcoming decisions. The culture shifted from fear and resentment to collaboration and community. 4 years after everything happened, I was working in my front yard on a beautiful spring morning when a car pulled up. A man in his 30s got out and approached me hesitantly. "Are you Lucas Garrison?" he asked. "I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Mark Chen. I'm Diana's brother. She told me about your case with the HOA president who planted invasive species. I'm dealing with something similar in my neighborhood in Charlotte, and I was hoping I could ask you some questions." I invited him in for coffee, and we spent 2 hours talking. He was facing harassment from his HOA president over fabricated violations, and he suspected the president was retaliating against him for questioning some financial decisions. I shared everything I had learned. Document everything, get expert witnesses if possible, do not be afraid to escalate to authorities, and find a good lawyer early. Otro, the biggest mistake people make is thinking they have to handle HOA disputes alone, I told him. These boards have lawyers and insurance. You need professional help to level the playing field. Mark left with pages of notes, copies of relevant documents from my case that Mitchell had authorized me to share, and renewed determination to fight back. 6 months later, he sent me an email update. His HOA president had been caught embezzling neighborhood funds and was facing criminal charges. Mark's documentation and willingness to escalate had triggered an audit that uncovered the theft. "Thank you for showing me I did not have to just accept the harassment," he wrote. "Because of your advice, our neighborhood is recovering and the person responsible is being held accountable." I forwarded the email to Henry, who replied with a simple message: "You started something good. People are learning they have rights." He was right. Over the years, I heard from several other people facing similar situations. Some had read about my case online, others were referred by lawyers who knew Mitchell, and a few were just desperate homeowners who found my contact information somehow and reached out for advice. I tried to help everyone who asked, sharing what I had learned and connecting them with resources. Jennifer eventually started a pro bono project through her law firm, offering free consultations to homeowners facing serious HOA abuse. She recruited Mitchell to help train other attorneys on HOA law and how to identify cases of board misconduct. The project grew, and within a few years, they were handling dozens of cases annually, and it helped change some state laws to provide better protections for homeowners. My own life settled into a comfortable routine. I continued working as an accountant. Jennifer and I got married 5 years after we met, and we eventually bought a bigger house in the same neighborhood because we loved the community so much. Henry and Margaret became like family, serving as witnesses at our wedding and becoming honorary grandparents to our daughter when she was born 2 years later. The house that had been Karren's eventually sold twice more, and the current owners were wonderful neighbors who became good friends with David and Rachel next door. Nobody who moved into the neighborhood in recent years had any idea about the dramatic history, and that was fine with me. Meadowbrook Estates had become the peaceful, functional community it was always supposed to be. Sometimes I drive past the area where the invasive plants had been, now thriving with native species and looking better than ever, and I think about how close I came to just paying Karren's fine and letting her win. If I had done that, she would have continued targeting other homeowners, the criminal behavior would have escalated, and the neighborhood would have remained a miserable place to live. Standing up to her was hard and stressful and expensive, even though I eventually got reimbursed. But it was absolutely worth it, not just for me but for everyone else who benefited from her removal and the subsequent reforms. That experience taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do, and that having good people in your corner makes all the difference. Henry once told me that invasive species thrive when they encounter no resistance, spreading unchecked until they destroy everything around them. The same was true of Karren's behavior. She spread her toxicity freely because nobody stopped her, until finally someone did. Removing her from power was like removing those invasive plants from my yard. Difficult, expensive, but absolutely necessary for the health of the entire community. Now, 10 years after the original incident, Meadowbrook Estates is everything a neighborhood should be. The HOA functions smoothly, providing essential services without overreach. Neighbors know and help each other. Property values have increased steadily. Children play safely in the streets. Community events are well attended and genuinely fun. And my yard, once threatened by deliberately planted invasive species, is now a showcase of native plants that support local wildlife, require minimal maintenance, and look beautiful year-round. Henry still helps me with it, though now my daughter joins us, learning about botany from the best teacher I know. The story of Karren Whitmore and the invasive plants became something of a legend in HOA law circles. Mitchell still uses it as a teaching example, and Jennifer's law firm includes it in training materials for their pro bono project. The case established important precedents about HOA liability, board member accountability, and the intersection of HOA law with criminal environmental statutes. But for me, it is simply the story of how I learned to stand up for myself, found my community, and helped create positive change in a small corner of the world. The nightmare of discovering those purple flowers along my fence line ultimately led to some of the best parts of my life. Deep friendships, a thriving neighborhood, a wonderful marriage, and the satisfaction of knowing I made a difference. Life has a funny way of working out sometimes. What started as deliberate sabotage by a vindictive HOA president ended up strengthening an entire community and helping countless others facing similar situations. The invasive plants are long gone, but the positive changes they inadvertently sparked continue to grow and spread, much like the native species that replaced them. Beautiful, beneficial, and exactly where they belong.